It all started on what seemed like an ordinary summer evening in Maplewood Heights, a neighborhood that prided itself on its manicured lawns, white picket perfection, and the iron grip of its homeowners association. The sun was setting over the rooftops, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold, and the sound of sprinklers ticked softly in the distance. To an outsider, it looked like the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. But behind those neat hedges and freshly painted fences lurked a tension that was about to ignite into something far more destructive than anyone could imagine. I had moved into the neighborhood less than a year ago. My house sat on the corner lot, surrounded by rose gardens that the previous owner had carefully cultivated. To me, it was a dream home, the kind of place I thought my family could finally settle into. But what I didn't know then was that moving into Maplewood Heights also meant moving into the crosshairs of the one person everyone quietly feared. The woman who ran the HOA as though it was her personal kingdom. Her name was Karen. From the very first week, Karen made her presence known. At first, it was small things. A note taped to my mailbox reminding me of the approved paint, colors, a complaint about my trash cans being visible for 5 extra minutes after pickup, a sharp glare every time. I parked my car half an inch over the faded white line in the community lot. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just overly passionate about rules. But as the weeks turned into months, her behavior shifted from irritating to menacing. She started showing up unannounced, clipboard in hand, pretending to conduct inspections. She'd linger by my driveway, staring at the rose bushes, as if she was looking for flaws only she could see. Neighbors whispered about her, but few dared confront her. Some said she'd gotten people fined into selling their homes. Others swore she used her connections on the HOA board to bully anyone who defied her. And then there were darker rumors about disputes that ended in mysterious vandalism. Cars keyed, tires slashed, gardens destroyed overnight. I should have paid more attention to those whispers. One evening, as I was watering my garden, Karen stopped by. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes carried a glint of cold steel. She told me my roses were a distraction from the uniform aesthetic of the neighborhood. I laughed it off. But she didn't smile. She leaned closer and whispered, "Around here, we like things done the right way. You wouldn't want to cause trouble for yourself." That was the first time I felt it, the weight of her words pressing like a warning. As summer dragged on, the tension escalated. Letters from the HOA flooded my mailbox, each one citing some supposed violation. A neighbor later told me Karen personally drafted them. My driveway was egged one night, and though I never saw who did it, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was behind it. And yet, nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. It was a Thursday evening when the fire began. I was inside, sorting through paperwork at my kitchen table, when I caught the faint smell of smoke. At first, I thought a neighbor was grilling. But within minutes, the scent thickened, filling my lungs with a bitter sting. I rushed to the window, and that's when I saw it. Thick, black smoke curling from the side of my house. Panic surged through me. I shouted for my family to get out, grabbing what little we could. Within moments, flames were licking up the siding, cracking windows and consuming everything in their path. The fire spread so fast it felt unreal, like watching a nightmare unfold in real time. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the entire second floor was engulfed in a roaring inferno. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, their faces pale with shock as water cannons blasted against the blaze. Firefighters shouted orders, hoses snaking across the street. The night sky glowed orange as embers floated upward, raining down on the rooftops nearby. My home, my dream, everything I had built was being devoured before my eyes. But even in the chaos, something caught my attention. Across the street, standing at the edge of her manicured lawn, was Karen. Her arms were folded, her expression unreadable. While others gasped and murmured in horror, she simply watched, not with sympathy, not with fear, but with a kind of cold detachment that made my stomach twist. The fire raged for hours before it was finally contained. The house was gone, a blackened skeleton against the night sky. Fire investigators worked late into the night, combing through debris, trying to determine the cause. But deep inside, I already had my suspicions. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Some neighbors offered condolences. Others avoided me as though misfortune was contagious. But one whispered to me what I had dreaded to hear. "I saw her. I saw Karen near your house before the fire started." That single statement set my world spinning. Suddenly, every strange encounter, every veiled threat, every malicious act clicked into place. Could she really have gone this far? Could an HOA feud have escalated into arson? The authorities launched an investigation. Days turned into a week, and the evidence began to stack up. Security footage, witness statements, traces of accelerant, and then, just as I was trying to process the loss of everything I owned, the moment came that still sends shivers down my spine. It was the following Monday morning. I walked into the county courthouse, still numb from the fire, clutching papers from my insurance company. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. My footsteps echoed down the marble hallway as I made my way toward the courtroom where a preliminary hearing was being held, and that's when I saw her. Karen, striding confidently down the same hallway, heels clicking sharply against the floor, as if she owned the very ground she walked on. Her chin was high, her expression smug. Like this was just another HOA meeting where she'd put someone in their place. In that moment, everything crystallized. The woman who had tormented me, who had smirked while my house burned to the ground, was now walking straight into my courtroom, unaware that this time she wouldn't be the one holding the power. And that was only the beginning. The courthouse was buzzing with a low hum of voices, shuffling papers, and the heavy thud of doors opening and closing. My steps slowed as I watched Karen approach, her eyes flicking over me with a smirk that suggested she still thought she had control. In her mind, she was still the HOA queen, the untouchable enforcer of rules in Maplewood Heights. What she didn't know was that this time, she had walked into a battlefield where her power meant nothing. The courtroom itself was cold, the walls lined with wood, paneling that seemed to absorb the tension hanging in the air. I sat near the front, hands clasped tightly together, my knuckles pale. My lawyer leaned close, whispering reassurances, but my focus was fixed on the woman who had taken everything from me. Karen sat across the room, her posture stiff, but her expression calculated, like she was still playing some neighborhood game. The judge entered and silence fell. The gavel struck once, echoing through the chamber. The proceedings began. The prosecution wasted no time. They painted a picture of the night my home went up in flames, describing in detail the speed of the fire, the intensity, the evidence of accelerants. Every word was a dagger, pulling me back into that moment of chaos and helplessness. My chest tightened as photographs were displayed. Charred remains of walls, melted furniture, a blackened staircase leading to nowhere. My house reduced to ashes, my memories gone in smoke. And then came the witnesses. First, a neighbor who had always kept to himself. His voice trembled as he recounted seeing Karen walking near my driveway that evening, carrying what looked like a container. He admitted he didn't think much of it at the time, until the fire erupted less than an hour later. Karen's lawyer objected, but the statement stood. Then came another neighbor, a woman who had long been the target of Karen's relentless nitpicking. She spoke of the threats Karen made, the intimidation tactics, the way she used the HOA as a weapon. She confessed that when she heard my house was burning, the first person who came to mind was Karen. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably, whispers rippling like a current. But the most damning evidence came when the investigators took the stand. They described traces of accelerant found near the point of origin, residues that matched the same type of fuel Karen had purchased just days before. And then, the security footage. The grainy black and white video filled the screen at the front of the courtroom. It wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough. A figure, unmistakably resembling Karen, moving near my property just before the fire. The outline of her walk, the way she carried herself, it was undeniable. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced across the room. For the first time, the smug mask on her face cracked. Her lawyer scrambled to spin the narrative, insisting there wasn't definitive proof, that it could have been anyone. But the cracks were widening. When it was my turn to take the stand, I felt the weight of every eye in the room on me. My voice was steady, but every word carried the raw truth of what I had lost. I spoke of the fear, the warnings, the veiled threats. I described the night of the fire, the smell of smoke, the roar of flames, The sight of Karen standing across the street as my world crumbled to ash. The jury listened intently, some shaking their heads, others scribbling notes. Karen's lawyer tried to rattle me on cross-examination, questioning my certainty, suggesting maybe grief had clouded my memory. But grief doesn't invent the truth, it sharpens it. And my truth was unshakable. Days of testimony stretched on, each one tightening the noose around Karen's carefully constructed facade. By the end of the week, her confidence had eroded. She no longer walked into the courtroom with that haughty strut. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes darted nervously, her once sharp words reduced to whispers with her attorney. The closing arguments were delivered with the weight of finality. The prosecution painted her as a woman consumed by control, so blinded by her desire to dominate her neighbors that she resorted to destruction. The defense scrambled, clinging to threads of doubt that barely held. And then, it was in the hands of the jury. Hours passed. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Every tick of the clock seemed to stretch longer than the last. Finally, the door opened and the jury filed back in. My breath caught in my throat as the foreman stood, holding the slip of paper that would decide Karen's fate. The room fell silent. The judge asked for the verdict. "Guilty!" The word rang out like a thunderclap. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Karen's face drained of color, her mouth opening in silent protest. She shook her head, muttering under her breath, but it was over. The gavel struck again, sealing her fate. I watched as she was led away, her once confident stride reduced to stumbling steps. The queen of the HOA, the woman who thought she could control everyone around her, was now powerless, swallowed by the very justice system she had never thought could touch her. As I stepped out of the courthouse that day, the air felt lighter. The sky was clear, the sun warm against my skin. My house was gone, my belongings reduced to ash. But there was something Karen could never take from me: the truth. She thought she could silence me, intimidate me, erase me from the neighborhood. Instead, she had exposed herself for who she truly was. Neighbors who once avoided me now offered quiet nods, even apologies. Some admitted they had been too afraid to stand up to her, too scared to speak out. But now the fear was gone. Karen was gone. And though my home would take months, maybe years, to rebuild, I knew this. Maplewood Heights would never again belong to her. Still, sometimes at night, when the wind rattles the windows of my temporary apartment, I think back to that fire. I see the flames, hear the crack of wood collapsing, smell the smoke that clung to my skin. And I see her standing in the shadows, watching as if it was all just a show for her amusement. But then I remember the look on her face, when the word guilty rang through the courtroom. And that memory, that moment of justice finally catching up to her, is enough to remind me that even the most powerful tyrants can fall. Because in the end, Karen didn't just burn down my house. She burned down her own empire. And in the ashes, all that was left was the truth.